Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Christy Harrington, Manager of Education from OMSSA. Welcome to our webinar today looking at leading a team remotely. We still have some folks that are coming in, so I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction and then we'll get started. So I hope that by the time we get through the intro, everyone is able to get on and take in this information. So we are scheduled for an hour, and then we're going to be able to do Q&A with Michelle, and we'll do those questions at the end of the webinar. You can put your questions in the questions panel on your webinar dash. So today we are going to look at our current environment and how we can manage and lead our teams during this difficult time. Tips and resources for connecting with your team as a whole or individually, and thinking outside the box to support your team and take care of yourself. Our facilitator for today is Michelle Schroeder. She's a consultant known for her work as the millennial strategist, and we've been fortunate enough to work with Michelle in the past, where she's done webinars for us looking at working with a multi-generational workforce. Today, she's going to help us to be effective in this new reality or new environment, even though it might be short-lived, looking at professionals and clients working from home and how we can do that effectively. So Michelle, I thank you so much for being here today, and I know that you're going to talk about how we can work effectively and some of our new coworkers that we might have at home. And I know that you've got a special coworker that we're hoping will join us later in the presentation. So I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Good afternoon. Hi, everybody. Wow, I bet you are taking this webinar from a place you might not have thought you'd be taking it from before, but here we are together, and you are leading a team remotely during a global pandemic, if you can believe that. So when Christy and I first talked about this, we were saying, you know, people are having so many questions. Some people who are leading a team are also, for the first time ever, working from home. So this is really new reality in so many different ways with so many questions. And so we thought we'd just take a real simple look at what are these basic questions and how we can offer some tips and tools on how to deal with all of this. The first place to start really is who, and who are we talking about, and who is this really about? And really what I want you to do is take a moment and think about you. And where this really starts is with you. And you are a leader. You've been in this position because you know leadership. You know how to do this. You might not know how to do it in some parts of this current reality, but you get leadership. And it's about safety. When we're in a crisis, it's about safety. I worked for many summers at summer camps. We had one time a camp, like a building was burning down. We had a parent stay at the end of the summer where we had all the campers and all the parents, and there was a tornado coming. And so you realize as a leader, it is about safety first and foremost. It starts with your own safety. And so how during this pandemic are you keeping yourself safe mentally, physically, emotionally? What does your bubble look like? Who's within your house in the bubble when we're self-isolating, and how are you keeping all of those people safe? Everybody getting their exercise. What does sleep look like? We have 2 kids here at my house, and the eldest has been having a really hard time with sleep, lots of nightmares, and she's at an age where she's really understanding and not what's happening, but it's scary. And so how is that affecting her sleep? And then how is it affecting our sleep? And we have to be really honest about that, and how we can do a really good job of taking care of ourselves first. It's just like, you know, when you're in the airplane, they do the drop down of that oxygen mask. We have to start with ourselves. The other part is really about extended families or neighbors or other people, and who is in that bubble that you see on the screen there, that second one. You can't reach out to them anymore, but who are you trying to take care of, whether it's your parents or a next door neighbor that might need groceries. So when you think of your own bubble, it's your bubble, and how are we keeping those people safe? How are we keeping our extended world and family and friends safe? And then your team. How are we leading them to keep them safe? What messaging are we giving them about their own personal safety? And how do you share that message with them? Because it's really about perspective and what you can control and what you can influence. And when I think about perspective, it makes me kind of chuckle, because my youngest says almost every day, this was the best day ever. And I think for so many people, we're in a pandemic, and yet for a 6-year-old, this is the best day ever because we've spent time as a family, outdoors, doing lots of different things. So how do we help our team really think about what is their attitude that they're bringing? What attitude are you bringing to the team? And how do we inspire? And when we think about inspiring, you're probably seeing lots of different press conferences and information coming over the screen. And just a couple things to keep in mind, that leadership speeches And no, you're not going to stand up and give a great big speech, but when you are talking with people, what's coming across? And so I'm probably going to say her name wrong, but Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany, she did a speech televised live on, I think it was March 18th. And, she really followed that kind of leadership guidelines of seeing things as they are, no better and no worse, seeing things as we want them to be. And then what is that path forward? She talked about this is serious, so we need to take it serious, and that we're at war, but the enemy is not human. And she just really laid it out, but she also connected at a personal level, and she was inspiring. And other people have done research on speeches and how we talk as a leader. Nancy Duarte is someone really interesting to watch. You can watch her on TED Talks or look at her research, but she's actually traced speeches that have been followed over time, that have been followed over the years, including Martin Luther King's, I have a dream. And what she talks about, that's the common path in those speeches, is that people go from what is to what could be. So we're connecting with people about what's really happening. What is really happening with your team? We're maybe getting more calls than we can handle. We're dealing with some really hard cases. We're dealing with people who are trying to find funding to pay rent. What is happening and what could be? How are we going to get through this? So having that inspiring element as well. So just some thoughts about yourself as that who, and how as that leader, you really are going to have an impact on how people work their way through this next few months, or however long we're dealing with coronavirus. The next question really about why. If people are asking you why, kids are asking you why, coworkers are asking you why, you might have spent a lot of time as a team working through what's our mission, what's our values, what's our vision or our motto. And sometimes those types of workshops might have felt a bit, why are we doing this? And really, what's the difference between some of those words? But now is the time where you can go back to that material and say, what are our values? And our values stand the test of time. So in the moment of coronavirus, a global pandemic, maybe we're about servant leadership. And so what does service look like? And if you are standing there as a leader feeling like you're getting people coming at you from all sides, and the pressure is just more than you can handle, it's about taking a step back and saying, how can I deal with, providing good service in a way I'm still breathing, I'm getting this going, and what does that look like? One person that I've been following a lot is Andrew Cuomo, from the governor from the state of New York. And on April the 3rd, he did a really neat talk where he reflected on two elements that are in the state of New York's emblem. And he talked about the words Excelsior, which is the state motto. And he was saying about how that means ever upwards. And it was very aspirational. We can be better and we can lift ourselves. And then the second piece of it was El pluribus unum, out of many comes one. And just the way he spoke, he really was trying to inspire his state, his people to say, we got this. This is going to be hard, but we got this. And I think that's when we're going through all of this, it's not just about the what and the how that we'll get to, but it's really about making people feel that you as the leader know how serious this is, and we got this. So now we get into the what. And what is the work? Now, when you shift from working in an office to being the person working at home, if you had made that transition not in a pandemic, you probably still would have found it's actually a big transition. You need to start rethinking, what does your day look like? What work are we doing and how do we get that done? And when I worked at the province, one point I heard a director say, my staff are asking to work from home, but if they work from home, how will I know that they've done the work? And that always struck me a bit funny, because I think what you want to really do is think about, what is the work? What's the practical pieces of things that we need to do every day? And for that, you want to have clear expectations. So is the work on your team right now about taking in a lot of calls? Is it about a lot of administration, then trying to respond to the information you get from those calls? And what does that mean for your team? Do they have to be at a computer or on a phone for 8 hours of a day to get the work done? Or are some people saying, I can't do that? I also have kids at home and I can't physically be at that computer answering calls for 8 hours a day. So how are you coming at this as a team? Maybe some people have more capacity to do that than others. And maybe some are saying, look, I could work from 7 to 9 at night and I could do some administration, but I can't do I'm sorry, just 1 second, okay? Just one moment, please. Can we turn that doll off? Okay, perfect example working at home. I'm very sorry. I have my office coworker is 6 and she is basically trying to take care of her children here. And one of them in the land of 2020 actually talks. So I do apologize about that, but we're going to turn that doll off right now. Thank you. So once we figure out what those expectations are, then we want to make sure we've got the right tools for the right job. So people want to make sure, you know, my office door is always open. Does that mean you're sitting at your computer every day, or do you have a cell phone? And if there's something urgent comes through, could someone reach you with the cell phone, and would that be better? Then you can feel like you can still get your fresh air and come back to work. So I think we have to be really mindful of our teams right now, because some people may feel that the stress of working at home and being worried that they will be seen as not on at all times can be so great that it can make the problem a lot worse, and it really can impact productivity. There was a company in New Zealand called Perpetual Guardian, and they have been looking at some research that said that on average, people are effective about 6 hours a day. And with that, even they were looking at companies that were shifting to 4 days a week. So they did shift to 4 days a week. They didn't lengthen the hours in the workday. They just went from 5 to 4. And they actually found that the stress was lower and the productivity was higher than a 5-day-a-week work week. So all this to say that as you're dealing with probably mounting pressures and increased caseloads, and you're thinking, how could we ever do any of that? It's a matter of trying to be as effective as possible when we're available to be on, but working with your team to look at what are the expectations, what are the goals we can look at, what is specific, measurable, actionable, what's relevant, and what's really kind of time bound, like how can we measure it? So people are feeling like, I am doing my best. My supervisor, my manager knows I'm doing my best, and we're all working on our best here at this time. And so when you're checking in with your staff, you're checking in and not so much checking up, because people need to feel that you're trusting and that right now everybody's got each other's back. How can you work in this new sort of era? And I think the big piece is that the relationship is still vital. So if you were, you know, if your team met every morning around 8, or you did a walkabout, maybe through a cubicle land to say hi to everyone first thing in the morning, to check in with people, you want to still find a way to still do that. So is it by phone? Is it by video? What are the ways that you can still keep those check-ins going? There's a funny video circulating right now called Ode to Zoom. Some of you might have seen it. If you haven't, check it out on YouTube. It's pretty cute on the world that we're living in when it comes to using Zoom as a tool for video. But there's so many different apps. In our house, we've got 6 to 8 different apps going on at any one time, whether it's the kids or whether it's my husband and I. And these apps, one of them is even called House Party, and you can, you know, connect with people in a more social way. And I think that's really important, because if we're all staying at home right now, we still need to find outlets and connect with adults. So some of the ones for work, or some of the ways that we want to connect, maybe using video for work right now, would be to inform. So some executives or senior leaders are doing something called Ask Me Anything on Friday afternoons or Monday morning. And that's really making sure that people feel you're being very transparent about what you know, about the numbers, about any changes maybe in operations, but keeping it very transparent, but from a senior level, showing that we're all kind of vulnerable, we're all doing this from home, and what does that look like? Another way you can do things to connect, you can do the morning announcements. My daughter started that in our house because they did that at school. And so 9 a.m. we all gather around and we go through morning announcements. What does the day look like? Now, maybe from work, there's a way to do some sort of check-in like that, or maybe you set something up a little bit. If you typically had coffee break at 10:30, maybe people just are invited to, if they want, to turn on their videos at 10:30 for 15, 20 minutes and just leave it on while people are grabbing a cup of coffee and connecting. How are things going? One leader I've heard is doing something called What Happens in Vegas, and she does a Thursday afternoon check-in at 2 o'clock. And it's just talk about kids, pets, house, what's going on in your neighborhood, how are people trying to help each other with coronavirus right now, and the social distancing, and what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And it's just meant to be that way to keep the team bonds there. For support, you want to think about, want to try as best you can is to get your team to be able to be honest with you about any limitations they're having or struggles they're having with dealing with all of this. We know there's going to be grief work coming. What is that going to look like? And you know best, you know either the teammate or the personnel best, you know who would maybe use video better for that, or phone, or how you can find ways to support people. For praise, another simple thing we're doing, again, invite your staff to use what's coming out of their family. One of my kids, that their school mascot is a husky, and so they have husky hoorays, and every week people can nominate each other for husky hoorays. So in our house, our kids decided, because we have a terrier dog at our house, it's terrific terriers. So throughout the course of the week, if somebody does something like empty the dishwasher or mop the floor, then they get secretly put their name in for a terrific terrier. And just to celebrate, we want to make sure that we're still gathering together in ways. One company is doing 3:30 Friday afternoons, popsicles and pop. And I guess you put in your glass what you choose to put in. But, just a way to sort of recognize that this is big and people are doing a lot. And let's just make sure we're all sort of also celebrating as best we can the small wins together. So, and just a note about that, obviously, we want to be mindful too that, we do things like they have been talking about it even on the news about the use of alcohol or other things, and that definitely is for after hours, not throughout the course of the day. So the last point there is just around things like dress code, lighting, microphones, background, kids and pets. So here's me thinking I'm doing a great job of that, and yet the background noise is still too loud. So making sure people know, please tell me if something is not looking good on the video, if the background noise is too loud. Everybody needs to be really honest about that right now, because there's nothing worse than sitting through an hour call with the sound of a chatty Cathy doll happening at the same time. So that's the how. And when we get to the when, there's nothing more important, I think, than your daily schedule. So we started with our anchor items. So any kind of key calls, or the other big anchor items are, if you have children at home, those are big anchor items as well. So if you have little people at home, that are still napping, that nap is key for you to figure out, and for your team to say, okay, well, let's see what we can schedule. What's so like the critical thing where you maybe need some quiet? How do we put that in around some of the core or the anchor activities? For us, we did an integrated schedule. The other part of that is, if you have a spouse or a partner that you're living with and you have kids at home, I've seen many families with children under 6 who are saying we cannot both work at the same time. And so that's a whole new balancing act that's going to take a bit of time for people to figure out. And you're probably already starting to see that with some of your staff, that you're having to support them as they're figuring out a whole new relationship with their partner at home, because now you're not just co-parenting, but you're co-parenting and you're homeschooling or child minding while you're trying to work at home with your new technology glitches and everything else. It is a dance. It is something to get used to if you had just gone from office work to working at home with a spouse also at home or a partner also at home. But if you've added children to that, it is a whole new world. And so how do you look at your day, find ways if you can to build in consistency? We've started where we have our morning announcements at 9. We get kids and pets out for a walk from 9:30 to 10:30. We came back, we did school until lunch. Sometimes we've called in supply teachers, as in grandparents, to do baking with the kids over Skype. Our kids are old enough that they can kind of do that with grandparents supervising that over Skype. So that's been a fun bonding thing with grandmas. And, then we've kind of carried on throughout the day. But it's a juggling act. And I think just being really mindful, supportive of your team, and bringing these kinds of conversations up, like what kind of schedules are you using in your house right now, is really big. And then we get into our where. So we've lost our commutes, and some people are saying, this is amazing. I actually don't ever want to have to go back to the office and deal with that commute, especially if you're in a bigger urban center. But what did you do on that commute? And this, I think, is really big, especially, I shouldn't maybe say especially, but I hear a lot of moms talk about that was sort of their space from when they left one orbit and they went to the next. That was their moment. It was either their chance to do a Sudoku puzzle. It was their chance to, go on their Loblaws PC Optimum and load up their points for the week. There were things people often got done, or listened to the Fan 590 sports news. So what did you do during that commute? And now where have you built that into your day? Because if you haven't, you might not even notice it, but you probably notice there's some extra pressure happening somewhere and you don't know where it's coming from, but you've got to still find ways to get those activities into your schedule. When I was working at home before the kids have been home, I would schedule all around 10 o'clock. I would schedule walk and talk calls. And I would do any meetings where I don't need to take notes. I would schedule them around 10 a.m. and walk the dog and take those calls, not with a big headset like this, but with earbuds on. And that was the way you get your exercise, you get a good walk in, the dog's happier, and you have a chat taken care of. So that was a nice thing too. And also, you know, walk and talks at this point, you are probably also thinking of some maybe older people within your bubble that are not in your bubble at your house, but in a bubble that is very close to you emotionally. And so, you know, there are people that you're wanting to connect in with too. So how are you building those people in? One thing we did, just as an aside, is with the kids in homeschooling, we said we encouraged them to work on what we called our people projects. So they each picked a person, one picked Billie Eilish, one picked Bob Marley, and they did Google research, you know, through speech to text and found out different things about them and created a bit of a presentation. So we had that for the course of 1 week, and we encourage grandparents to do it too. So Poppy got to pick who he wanted, and he didn't tell us. He picked his grandfathers, so he taught the kids some family history, and Grandma didn't know who to pick, so the kids gave her Jennifer Lopez, which is kind of funny to see my 75-year-old mom researching Jennifer Lopez. But it's a way to connect the grandparents, the grandkids during this time where there's social isolation, but it also takes a bit of pressure off you while you're trying to get some work done and they're busy doing other things with other people. Last two there are just around the serenity zones. Are there spaces in your home that you can actually make off limit for work? And some people find working in your bedroom is good space, and that's fantastic. But some people say, no, thank you. That one needs to be just reserved for me. So just think about that. If there's some spaces, I know one family put a tent in their backyard on the deck, and they said, if anybody needs quiet, there's a good space to go to. And then the last one is the ergonomics. I've heard some people saying that they wish that they were in physio or OT because they have a feeling that when all of these people after 2 or 3 months of working at home are going to have lots of sore necks and shoulders, but maybe there's an opportunity for you to work standing up now or to move about in a different way. So there's something to check. So I think once we've kind of gone through the who, the why, the how, when, and where, you really want to just remember that as a leader, you do know how to lead. And yes, this is a new world, but how by taking care of yourself and starting there and working your way out and thinking about how what you're going through connects into that empathy for your team, and then looking at that empathy with your team and saying, imagine this is what we can also share with our clients, is going to be a really effective way to do your bottom line goal, which is you want to make sure that at the end of all of this, you still got your people with you, and that's what you're really hoping for. So before we sign off, I just would like to ask my office coworker here to help me out with our I'm hoping that the sound works. So this is my coworker, Mallory, and Mallory's going to read this slide for you. Okay, go ahead, yeah.
People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. By Maya Angelou.
So thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to Christy now. Thank you, Mallory. You can go play, okay?
Thank you, Michelle and Mallory. That was great. Good work, Mallory. Well done. So thank you, Michelle, for a very engaging and insightful presentation. We do have one question from Tara, which I think is a really good one at this point, and I'm wondering how we both might answer it. In some situations, staff have been deployed to other departments. So how do we keep engaging with those individuals if they may be prevented from team calls, given that they're deployed to other areas? Any thoughts?
Do you want to go first, Christy?
Yeah, if you want to, sure.
Well, I personally think that right now we need all the people in our network. So I'm not sure if they're not allowed to speak with you, but I would think that if they're being deployed elsewhere now, but the intent is that they'll be coming back, that I would still try to do a once a week, even if it's a half hour, and even if it's not a social call as in let's have a party, but just some sort of checking in call. What's it like where you are? What are you learning that might be able to come back to our team someday? If there's any opportunity for that kind of half-hour connection once a week, I would see if there's a way you could build that in.
Is that helpful, Tara? I'm also putting a question. Someone had a question that I don't think Michelle and I could really answer effectively, but it's really about people who are in fear of losing their jobs and how to deal with that anxiety. And I mentioned to the person who asked the question that we are going to be offering other webinars in the coming weeks around dealing with anxiety. So I hope that you guys can all join us for that. But what I've done is I've put that person's question in the chat box because I'm sure that all of you have some really good best practices that you could perhaps share with this individual. And at this point on a webinar with over 200 people, that's going to be the best way to share that kind of information. So I encourage you to go to the chat box and contribute to that if you can. If there are other questions, if you would want to put them into the questions panel on your webinar dash, we can certainly get to those. I'm just kind of going through and seeing what else we have. I'm not seeing anything else currently, but Tara did respond that she found that answer to be helpful. And that some of her team is being deployed to long-term care, so their physical ability to participate is limited. So maybe it might have to do an after-hours cheers, and I think that's a great way to do that. Tara, you obviously have a good relationship with your team that you're able to do that.
Yeah, I would encourage any of that. I know a couple other women that I worked with have started Friday 5 o'clock, getting online together once people are home. I think anyone, especially working in some of those really, really emotionally charged spaces right now, like long-term care homes. I mean, are there other ways? Not that I'm encouraging people to leave their homes in a way that brings people closer together physically. Obviously, we want to maintain social distancing first and foremost, but are there ways, if you know where their car's parked, can you leave a little note on their car? Could you, in my neighborhood, sidewalk chalk, I think there should be, I wish I would have bought stock in sidewalk chalk right now because there's sidewalk messages everywhere. So are there ways to leave messages for your teammates? There's so many interesting ways that people are connecting, but connection is vital right now. So in whatever way you can do it, I would still encourage you to do it. Deployment, being put in other spaces. Yeah, if they're part of a bubble that you connected with in the past, then you keep them close in your bubble and whatever you can.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, sorry, I might have missed one. So Valerie has just shared that the Psychology Foundation of Canada has a number of resources that address COVID-19 stress. So we will include that. I'm going to tell everybody at the end of the session, as well as in the email that will include the evaluation. We do have resources on the OMSSA website, so I'll point you in that direction that you can find other resources as well.
Perfect.
So Bruce is asking, how do we review home schedules with our staff? So how do we coach them to manage their work-life balance when both are so closely integrated? How do we review home schedules with our staff? Oh, sorry, that's just repeating what Bruce had said. And I think, Michelle, you do have some interesting tips for that.
Well, I think, I mentioned before about starting with your anchor items, and it really is dependent upon the work of the team. And so, I was saying to Christy that my husband works with the federal government and in the area of trade and global affairs and whatnot. And, she was hosting a session on the Ask Me Anything and whatnot. And they were talking about how this is really why we have a team. So when you look at the collective work that is expected of your team, we might have to think about doing it a bit differently. And I know your question is about scheduling, but when you think about what the work is, then sort of the schedule can kind of come out of, well, how are we going to fit these things together? Because this is a wild challenge we've all been given here. So I look at in our home, it's, what can you do before kids are up, or when they're first up? If the people on your team are saying, I do have kids at home, and so what does that mean? Well, if they're first up for a little bit and they don't need your immediate attention, is there a way to build in some hours there that are really good productive hours for people? But it comes back to, I think, looking at what is the work that we as a team need to get done, and then saying, okay, how do we break that out? Does somebody have to be sitting on the phone at all times? How are we going to chunk that out? So it might start with you sharing, if you're comfortable, the schedule that you're using at home right now, and what does that look like? And then asking others who might be comfortable to say, yeah, I'm good to share our schedule. This is how we're doing it in our house. Because examples that know your industry or your type of work best might be a good way to start showing what does it look like. If you have kids in the home or your staff have kids in the home, consistency is key. So it might be what's working here lately, it seems, is to say, Daddy, you're available from 11:30 till 2:30 every day. You cover lunch, you cover all of that. And so then I know I can schedule all things there, and I can build a schedule around that. But I guess first and foremost is just talking with your staff, saying that our schedules are not going to look like they did when we were all in the office, when we had kids who were being taken care of by schools. When we dropped them off until we picked them up, we didn't have to provide direct care for them, but now people do. So our schedules are not going to look at all like they did before, and that's okay. And we know that, and we all have to take care of the responsibilities in our lives, personally and professionally. So how do we start to integrate those things? I mean, even simple things like we actually save the good dog bones now for when we're on calls such as this one, because we know that the dog needs to be quiet. That's not a scheduling issue, but if that's the case, you got to get the kids and the dog need their attention before you have something kind of big and important coming up that you need to have quiet for.
Thanks, Michelle. Bruce, I hope you found that helpful. I'm not sure if you were actually looking for a specific tool or software, or if you were looking more for that sort of answer that Michelle provided. So let me know if it is that you're looking for something else. Paulette was asking and really sharing something that I think is really important, that for her, their bubbles include the families at the nursery school program, which has been very emotional, and she's looking how to support the staff. And Michelle, I'm sure you've got some insight into that as well, but Paulette, I think some further tips might be in future webinars as well. So I'll hand it over to Michelle, but we will be addressing some of these other sorts of things in different webinars as well. So Michelle, I'll turn it over to you if you've got a response for that.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, and I apologize, Bruce, if you were looking for software there about scheduling, for the families, the staff that are working with families in childcares, I think one, you're probably going to find, I don't know if you're seeing this already, but I'm seeing a lot of amazing sharing happening between different locations across the province. I get a lot of feed from Chatham-Kent, and some really fun stuff there where people are. One woman actually was out in her barn with goats all around her, reading a story about goats and from her farm to the kids that she's typically serving through Facebook. And of course, then it becomes, well, how do we connect with our families on Facebook? So seeing if there's any way that you had any social media or digital tools that you've already been tapped into these families, and then finding ways to really magnify that. But I think your point is so bang on, because the families are needing it, but I really think the kids are needing it too, because there are a lot of resources out there for parents and how to keep things interesting. In our neighborhood, there was a Facebook group for families, so there was a lot of families had already joined up to that, and I don't know that any childcare centers in this community would have been aware of that because they don't live here, but there was a residential one, and they've got a schedule every 2 days. It changes what funny things we put in the front windows, or what funny sidewalk chalk is being drawn on the streets and sidewalks. So there are people doing a lot of different things. I think connecting in with the families and the kids is vital, and there's just so many resources out there already happening for that. I think, like Christy says, there's going to be another session that's going to tap into that a bit, but it's really key. And I think just reminding your staff too that they are doing their best, and if they have ideas and they're saying, I wish we could do this, then let's put that wish out there and find a way to make that wish happen. There's got to be ways to make these things happen. How can we do that?
Yeah, and I don't, Keith had a question just about multiple team members and differing schedules. So Keith, I'm not sure if that question was answered when looking at sort of those anchor items that your team must cover, and then how do you sort of build in those other things with other folks. So let us know if that question's been answered, or if you're looking for something more. And I'm
Christy,
just scrolling through to see. Sure, go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing from the work that we used to do on different generations. An interesting thing that often would come up is that, and forgive me if I've got this all wrong, but just something to keep in mind is that I think Gen Xers and baby boomers often feel that leadership means we need to solve a lot of these answers and solve a lot of the problems, and that's our role as a leader. And I think through the research that we had done in millennial strategists and on the different generations, millennials don't come at it this way always. It's okay to give them a challenge, or to give them a problem or something you're trying to work through. So I think when it comes to that kind of being creative and how are we figuring overlapping, integrating schedules, all that stuff, see if there's a way you can get the team to help. And your team best. So if people are way too overwhelmed and there's too much pressure, then your team and you're the leader and you know the pulse. So then don't go there. But if you feel like, maybe we should just bring this up and say, I know a lot of you are struggling with these schedules and I'm struggling as a leader. Does anybody have any ideas? Are there any tools or apps that you're hearing about? Are there other ways that we could come up with this? When the assistant deputy minister was speaking about the Ask Me Anything, and she had her kids kind of back in the background and showing what her reality was like. It was interesting to me that, staff have children and youth and teens of all different ages. Are there ways that some of those teens, they can't go out and babysit right now, but could they do something for maybe another team worker who has younger kids? Could they send something out before a staff meeting to all the little kids that they could do on a separate screen while the team members are having their own call? So I think this is maybe that turning point where we shift from that leadership feeling that we need to be problem solvers to leadership's leading teams to solve some of these problems as a team.
That's a really good suggestion, Michelle. Thank you. I'm just going through the question panel. I don't see any other questions, so I'll give people another minute or so to put in their questions. And as that, I'll look and see if there are any other questions. But in the meantime, we will be sending out an email with an evaluation right after the webinar. And that email will include resources that OMSSA has on their website, not only for working from home and working with teams, but other COVID-19 pieces. And as well, Michelle will be doing another webinar for us tomorrow that looks specifically at tips and tools for working from home effectively, your environment, getting your tasks done, what it feels like to be working in this environment now, and how overwhelming that can be, and some of the things that we can do to maybe mitigate those. So I'm just going to do another quick run through, and I'm not seeing any other questions. So we did end a little bit early, but again, I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. And I hope that if you have time, you can join us tomorrow if you're not already signed up. And please keep a lookout for other webinars that we're going to be offering on a number of different topics to try to help members through the situation. And I think you can certainly email me at any time with any of your suggestions or needs that you might have in the professional development area. And I will now sign off, and thank you, Michelle, again for everything, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.